All right, my friends, welcome, welcome. We are going to take a quick look at how to manage risk in the world of Agile. Believe it or not, a lot of people think risk management is something that shouldn't be done the way it is in predictive in Agile. But those folks may want to think again, because after all, what is risk? Risk is uncertainty that can impact an endeavor positively or negatively. When you really think about it, risk, of course, could impact agile projects, right? Risk is not a respecter of agile. It is not a respecter of hybrid. Risk is risk, uncertainty that matters. So the question is, how smart are we in tackling uncertainty that matters? In the world of agile, there are certain concepts that help us. It has built-in mitigation techniques quite all right. The sprint review is a risk mitigation technique. A prioritized backlog, the daily scrum, and frequent releases, decentralized decision-making, transparency, and time boxes. But the question is this enough in the world of Agile? And to be honest, the answer is no, it's not enough. Firstly, we should encounter risk as a factor of prioritization from a product owner perspective. So when a product owner looks at a product backlog, that product owner should be thinking, what is riskiest here? So in terms of risk, we could say we have high risk or low risk, right? If you have high risk and high value items, these are high value items that the customer will find immense value from. You cannot avoid doing those because the customer wants them. It would behoove you to put them first because doing them last increases the likelihood of not finishing these high risk items. So you want to do what is tough, big, hairy, and audacious first when it gives you high value. On the flip side, when you have low risk and high value, those are things you want to consider to be secondary. So start off with the high risk items that are high value, then low risk items that are high value. And in that way, the likelihood of you finishing the high risk, high value is a lot more. So you prioritize those. When it comes to low risk and low value, you could put those in the third category. And those that are high risk and low value, you may want to ask yourself, why are we even doing these? Because they are high risk. When all is said and done, you can approach risk in a simplistic fashion by taking a look at this 3x3 risk matrix. We often refer to the risk score more in the world of predictive project management. But here, you can find that it's very useful in identifying risks and very quickly assigning a score. Now, when you create a risk register in the world of Agile, it doesn't have a stamp that says Agile risk register. A risk register is a risk register. For those folks who may not have encountered any of my teachings about the risk register, if you go to the website tinyurl.com/Sigma PMO, which is a direct link to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention website, which has got a plethora of tools and ideas, you can readily download a risk tool, this risk management log. I'm going to use this as an example of how you could log risks, even in an agile world. So in an agile world, having a tool like this is helpful. We have the risk description, the impact, the areas, the symptoms, the triggers, the responses, and so on. In my mind, as a professional, you want to be intentional about your management of risk. You could add some things to this. You could also include a risk cause. So not only do you have the risk and the impact, but you could also have the cause of the risk. So you could have something that looks like this. You could have the cause, the risk, and the effect. So let me put a little bit of paint on this just for illustration purposes. You want to be thinking like this: cause, what could cause that risk to happen? Risk, what is the risk itself, and what is the effect or the impact. If you have these three columns, it helps your team think a little bit more strategically when it comes down to finding out how to deal with the risk. Let's go back in a little time machine for those of you who've been into PMP or SCRUM or ACP training. You do remember the concept of a risk adjusted backlog, or perhaps you don't. So let me go over it. In the world of Agile, the product owner's job really is to prioritize those items in the backlog. If this is a backlog, you see stories in the backlog, right? But the concept of the risk adjusted backlog takes the risks that we've identified using the risk score. The RF really just means risk factor. Risk 1 is a risk factor of 9, risk 2 is a risk factor of 6, risk 3, a risk factor of 6, and risk factor really just means risk score. So based on what you know about these risks, and based on what you know about your backlog, these risks need certain treatments, actions. In the world of Agile, we refer to these as spikes. You need to insert spikes to deal with these risks at different points in the backlog. And that is one of the ways that we can deal with risk in the world of Agile, the concept of the risk adjusted backlog. But it doesn't go without, first of all, having a risk register, like I showed you. Every good Scrum Master should be thinking like this instead of being reactive. And in addition to this, working with the product owner to identify where spikes are needed. There are going to be some risks that have a low risk factor or risk score that you do nothing about. But for the most part, you want to be proactive about your risk management. Let me give you some guidance from the PMI and their 7-step process, and then we'll close for the day. The first thing you want to do is have a plan. Plan for risks. How are you going to manage the risks? This is about the management, right? Plan for risks. How are we going to manage them? Number 2, work with the team and identify risks. You can do these in various events, such as your backlog refinement, if you do backlog refinement, even though it's not a formal event, or you could do this in a retrospective. Thirdly, do a very quick qualitative risk analysis. Fourthly, do some sort of quantitative risk analysis. And here, I want you to be thinking about things like the cost of delay, revenue erosion, and other resource-related risks. You got to quantify what the impact could be in an analogous fashion. It doesn't have to be so detailed, but just do some quantitative risk analysis to understand what you're up against from a quantitative standpoint. Next, plan the risk responses with a team. Finally, implement the risk responses as spike work. When you have planned these responses, something else you should do is adjust the backlog. And lastly, as every good Agilist should do, monitor the risk conditions before they become impediments. And that is a 7-step process that should help anyone in the world of Agile. You don't necessarily have to be the product owner or the Scrum Master before you take heed to risks. I think it's everyone's job. So I'll call this 7 steps to manage risks in an Agile world. Very simple questions that you can ask the team. You can ask questions more regularly than waiting for the retrospective. It's something that needs to be a daily lifestyle. And if a risk is found by team members, that can be communicated in the risk register or communicated to the Scrum Master or product owner, but it shouldn't be ignored. All right. I hope this gave you some context about how to effectively manage risk in the world of Agile. If you read through a lot of publications, you see them addressing scope in an Agile world, schedule in an Agile world, but the work that is out there for risk is very minuscule. And that's why I put this together to give people ideas. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.